and a community engagement partner with Novant Health. We honor today another year commemorating the Hispanic Heritage Month, the closing of the Hispanic Heritage Month. And today's webinar, we're going to present the Latino, Hispanic, Latinx, the complexity of terms, self-identity, and inclusion. A conversation of experts in relation to the terms or categories that are often used interchangeable to describe a group that make up about 19% of the US population. While it is now common to use umbrella terms to categorize those with ties to more than 20 Latin American countries, these words have not always fostered a sense of community among the people they are supposed to describe. I'm pleased to introduce our expert panelists joining us today. Edelmira Segovia, Director at Centro Hispano, University of North Carolina in Wilmington. Edelmira is from Lima, Peru. Her research area is the academic success of ethnic and racial minorities, particularly of Hispanic students at selective college or universities. In her 23 years of work with public education, she has served populations underrepresented in higher education, taught world languages, coordinated migrant education programs, and served as diversity and inclusion administrator. Rafael Osuba is the artistic director, producer, author, publisher, and self-proclaimed Quixote. Is best known for being the founder of the 7-month-long El Quixote Festival, North Carolina, now in its 8th year, featuring art exhibits, literary gathering, opera, music, dance, theater, cinema, and gastronomy, together with several academic and educational institutions, including Duke University, Meredith College, Queens, University of Charlotte, and others. Rafael Prieto is the editorial director of Que Pasa Mi Gente Media Network, Latino Communications LLC, and founder of Patriotic Celebration. He's the chair and founder of Charlotte's Patriotic Celebration and Traditions Committee, which have held more than 175 patriotic gatherings. Mr. Prieto won first place in opinion column from the National Association of Hispanic Journalists. As we start today's webinar, we invite you to tell us how you are doing in the chat. We'll collect the questions we're hearing frequently from community members to guide our conversation, but we also invite you to send us additional questions in the questions and answer button at the bottom of your screen. So we're gonna start right now with an introduction of the topic. Give me 1 second. So as we know, we're basing today the conversation on the Latinx, Hispanic, and Latino terms. On the research, the history and evolution of the term Latinx, Dr. Cristobal Salinas Jr. and Dr. Adele Lozano state that Pew Research Center survey found that 50% of Hispanic adults prefer to identify themselves based on their family's country of origin, such as Mexican, Colombian, Guatemalan. 23% prefer to use pan-ethnic label, Latino or Hispanic, and 23% use American to describe themselves. Nonetheless, over the past 50 years, pan-ethnic label for this population continued to evolve. The term Latin, which traditionally encompassed both male and female genders according to the rule of the Spanish language, has evolved within the literature and daily conversation as Latino, Latina, Latinx, or Latinx sign. and most recently as Latin. The emerging term Latinx, like predecessors Latino and Hispanic, is often misunderstood and misused in higher education settings, research, and practices. As people both inside and outside of the academy grapple with the meaning and use of the term Latinx, it is important for researchers, particularly those who identify as Latina or Latinx, to engage in self-reflection regarding the intersecting identities related to power, privilege, and oppression. Additionally, for those who do not identify as Latinx, requires an intentionally understanding of the underlying complexities of the term. So let's dive in with our first question. Any of the panelists can answer this question. What do you think about the need to engage in self-reflection on the use of identities related to power, privilege, and oppression? ¿Qué piensa sobre la necesidad de participar en la autorreflexión sobre el uso de identidades relacionadas con el poder, el privilegio y la opresión?
Voy a hablar yo. I'm going to speak. I believe it's unnecessary completely to talk about it. I believe we have decided and we have lived with two terms that have been describing perfectly the whole community. The first time that the term Hispanic was used all over the United States was when Congressman Ed Roybal, a Mexican from East Los Angeles, created the Week of Hispanic Heritage. That was 1968. It wasn't 3 years or 4 years. And the term Latino has been used for a while, even the US Census, after trying to decide a unified term for everybody, decide for both terms, because it was a suggestion that they decide something. It wasn't a creation of them to think, okay, we are going to oppress the people with the term Hispanic or with the term Latino. They decide to have a neutral terms for the whole community.
Anybody else?
I think that it is essential that we self-reflect, and the self-reflection goes beyond just the identity of Latino, Hispanic, but our identity as a person. I think that in our quest to try to have a more harmonious community, a more supportive community, supportive of each other, the more that we know about ourselves, the more that we look into our roots, the more we look into why we behave the way that we do, and why we identify with the words that we identify with, the better set we would be to try to also understand the other, whatever the other may be. Even within our own community, we realize that we're a very diverse community. And so even understanding the other within our ethnicity or within our group. So I think that anything that we do that aligns with self-reflection and truly going introspectively, the better position we are going to be more understanding of those that may be different than us. And then in terms of reflection in the dynamics of power and privilege, or power and oppression, I think that you brought up the word privilege. I think that we need to realize that in the dynamic of power and oppression, if we are at any given point not being the recipient of the oppression, then we really are in a position of power or privilege. And I say this because at any given time, all of us could also use that position to voice and to elevate the quality of life of the population that may be being oppressed. I'm not sure if we're going to have a chance to talk about that or those specific words later on, but I thought that I would bring that to light at this point, that oftentimes we think of a community that may be oppressed, not realizing that at any given time, we may be part of that community or also be on the privileged side to have a voice and to use our voice to elevate our peers.
Thank you.
Rafa?
Rafael.
Well, I agree with both my colleagues here in many respects. Well, the only thing that I would add to the conversation is that these terms are an issue of identity, right? It's an issue of society trying to put a certain group into a box, and that's really what it's about. You know, it's about power, it's about money, it's about creating a larger group, and it's a little bit lazy at the same time, because I mean, how difficult is it to say Hispanic, Latino, right? Latinx. You know, if I self-identify as Latino, then I don't self-identify as Hispanic or Latinx. I'm not Latinx. So if we're looking at the word Latinx as a word of inclusion, but by nature, by eliminating the other two, you're excluding, because there's a large group of individuals that don't identify as that new term, and most of them have never even heard of the term, let alone identify as that. The other thing is that I think this is an American issue, and I'll tell you why. Because, you know, we became Hispanics and we became Latinos and now Latinx because we're trying to find our place in the US, right? We're trying, because they're trying to force us to okay, so what are you? What are you? In Colombia, Rafael was Colombian. You know, in Puerto Rico, I'm Puerto Rican, right? I'm not Latino, I'm not Hispanic, I'm not Latinx. So that's an issue about identity and trying to fit people into a box. And it is a little bit lazy, because I hear a lot of my counterparts saying, well, you know, it's too much work to do, especially in politics, too much work to identify people as Hispanic, Latino, and Latinx. But listen, you're talking about roughly 21 countries, right? And especially here in the US, Spanish is spoken or taught in our university system, especially in UNC systems. Probably the largest amount of students that are enrolled in learning Spanish. Spanish is the second largest spoken language in the world, right? So it's a little lazy and a little kind of wrong to try to dismiss everyone just because we want to encompass everybody in a nice, neat box. And we're not the same. You know, Latinos come from many different countries. They have different ways of thinking. They have different education levels. They have different cultures. They have different music. They have different religions. They have different languages within Spanish. I mean, we don't even want to start about the dialects within the Spanish language. It's immense. So I really think that this is a little bit about power. It definitely is. It's a way of grouping everybody together and saying, okay, this group over here is this, right? Well, we're not a monolith. We're not the same in any way. And even look at this panel today. We're all white, but there are Black Latinos, right? There are Black Hispanics. There are Black Latinx people, right? So we're not the same. We don't look the same. A lot of times we don't even act the same. So, and sometimes we don't even get along. So I would say it doesn't take that much to say Hispanic, Latino, Latinx. That's the way I look at it. And I self-identify as Latino. So there you go.
Thank you. So we go to the second, we need to move on a little bit, but Rafael, you did
I believe it's important to say something, and that the new term Latinx came with the spirit of inclusion, and the result was a term for exclusion, because we are not a monolithic community. not everybody have the same position about beliefs, politics. Everybody have used Hispanic and Latino since Kennedy, Latinos for Kennedy, or Hispanics for Obama, or for Rubio. But Latinx tries to include people that have a vision, and that I respect everybody, but not everybody, especially conservative people, feel comfortable with Latinx.
Well, I will expand on that. I see your point, Rafael, in mentioning that the term, maybe the intention of it was inclusion, and then in your opinion, the result of it ended up being exclusion. I think the exclusion piece comes in when we just emphasize or prioritize one term over the other. Which you may see. It may be that in literature or even in publications or something, somebody's using one term as opposed to the other. Obviously, you have to take on the writer's bias. Just as with anything, there's bias. There's bias in the selection of us three being here today, and not somebody else. So bias is going to be there. But I wanted to just echo my colleague's point made earlier, in that identity truly is a self-definition. Nobody can tell you, I, or anybody how to identify. If we see it in writing, if we see it in print, we have to look at it also through the lens of whoever wrote it, the shoes they're wearing, their background, and their opinion is no less important than your very strong opinion. We all have our opinions, and all of us identify from where we're standing. And so I see where, you know, if it is a publication or something that is meant to be broad and intention, or the intention for it to be inclusive, and then we see one single term used, I think that we have to keep in mind that there's no.
You know, all my life I have lived, I have get money with the language. I have been a journalist here since 1979 in the United States. I have lived in Miami, in Los Angeles, in New York, in Washington, DC. And I have lived the experience to define my community and how the people define the community. The style book in Spanish for UPI in 1981 had Hispanic. The New York Times Book of Style had Hispanic, actually about the same time. The style book of Los Angeles Times had Latino. And I wrote a column a couple of years ago saying un debate bobo, because with the 25 or 30 years ago, we had a discussion through columns with one friend in New York, Miguel Perez. I was for Hispano, he was for Latino. But what I wrote a couple of years ago was that the solution was done by the US Census. Por cierto, me encontré con un titular de una nota de F que combina las palabras a la perfección. Rubio y Cruz, dos hispanos sin el apoyo latino para llegar a la Casa blanco.
Yeah, that's Rafael Prieto is making a political.
No, no, no,
commercial.
I'm not
It's
saying.
like that sounds like a political commercial.
No, 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 it's not political. It's the
Against.
is the use of the language. Is of the use
So
of
can
the
you
language.
repeat the statement so I can translate,
Okay.
Rafael?
Okay, Rubio and Cruz. It was a title of one
The headline.
headline or one story from EFE. It says Rubio and Cruz, dos hispanos,
Two
sin el apoyo,
Hispanics
sin el apoyo latino
with no support,
from the Latinos
with no support from Latin
to get to the
Latinos
White House.
to the White
Using
House.
the two words, the two basic words
Okay, okay.
that the media has used 40 years ago, and that the census established that in the 1970s, and previously in the El Diario La Prensa that was founded in 1910, more than 100 years ago, was using even Hispano for a couple of years.
So let me.
I'll just say one thing
Rafael.
real quick. I'll say one thing real quick. Everything evolves, right? Language evolves. New things happen. New words are added to the Spanish dictionary, to the English dictionary all the time. And I'll just reiterate what I said before. I think this is an issue. This Latino, Latinx, Hispanic is an issue of identity, right? My festival is called, the El Quijote Festival, and the website is Yo Soy Quijote. I self-identify as El Quijote. No one can tell me that I am not Quijote. No one, right? Because that's the way I self-identify. It's okay for individuals to say, I identify as this, I identify as that. Where the problem is when we try to eliminate the others that are there. So I've always said this. If you self-identify as Latinx, or you self-identify as Latino or Latina, or you self-identify as Hispanic, that's fine. The problem comes in, the pressure comes in when writers, media, right, when the government, right, for grants and everything, for money and power, want to group everybody in the same place for the census. And that's lazy, right? It doesn't take much to say Hispanic, Latino, Latinx. Now everybody's included. To say Latinx is exclusionary because you're putting out two other groups that don't self-identify. And we all know the Hispanic, Pew Hispanic Center research, where 93% of the population doesn't even know what Latinx is or doesn't self-identify. So why would we exclude 93% to make 3% happy? It doesn't make sense, right? So that's all I would say. Language evolves. We don't have the same words that we started when Cervantes first wrote El Quijote, and it was used as the dictionary, the modern dictionary, right? We don't. The language has evolved. We need to evolve as well.
So we're gonna move on with the second question, which is very related to what you have been discussing. And the second question is, which term do you think will prevail and why? Spanish speakers, Latinos, Hispanics, or Latinx? ¿Qué término cree que prevalecerá y por qué? ¿Hispanohablantes, Latinos, Hispanos, o Latinx?
Karina, here I see a total, I'm seeing apples and oranges being mixed here with three terms that I see connected to a community: Latinos, Hispanic, and Latinx, but not necessarily Spanish speakers, very much because the further away we get from the generation that actually originally spoke Spanish, the less Spanish speaking we are as a community. And so I definitely do not equate Spanish speaker with Latino, Hispanic, or Latinx. So I'm going to pull that one aside. I don't think that Spanish speakers truly relates to necessarily to a people.
And why? why the question includes, well, why would you think it doesn't relate?
Well, do you want me to answer why I don't think
Yeah.
Spanish speaker relates to our community? I'll expand on what I just mentioned, that the further away we get, third or second, third, fourth generation from the original Spanish speaker, which could have been an immigrant or could have been a person who's the border crossed them. But the further away we get from that Spanish speaking family, from the Spanish speaking origin, the less Spanish truly, it becomes part of our daily lives. So let's look at my children's children. I don't know, it took me a huge amount of effort to assure that my children are bilingual. I don't know that my children are going to have the availability of time and effort to assure that their children are Spanish speakers. So so we're talking about third generation at this point. So that doesn't, I don't doubt that they will continue to somehow cling on to their Latino, Hispanic, Latinx identities, because we practice that through our culture. But that's what I refer to in that the Spanish speaking piece in mind, it might be a Spanish speaker, but not in practice. So that's why I'm pulling that Spanish speaking part. Not only that, but then we talk about identity, and then we are assuming that anybody of the three terms, anyone that identifies with Latino, Hispanic, or Latinx must have the component of being Spanish speaker, and that is simply not the case. And I see it day in and day out with, many of my 1,500 students who identify as Hispanic, Latino, or Latinx, who do not at all navigate the Spanish language. They're no less Latino, they're no less Hispanic, they're no less Latinx because they don't dominate the language by whatever the situation may have been in their families. We have a number of adoptees. And so whatever the situation may be, it makes them no less Latino. To answer the question that you actually posed, which term do I personally think that will prevail? Just by the demographic of the countries of our family's origin, I see that the Latino term is most broadly used at this point than the Hispanic term. That's just by what my observations. However, when it comes to reporting, especially government reporting forms, when we have to disaggregate data for our student enrollment, the term that continues to be used on official documents, at least the ones that I'm privy to, is Hispanic. I don't know if that's going to turn later, but I'm seeing a bit of a turn.
We have three questions. I want to tell the participants that I'm gonna honor your questions, but we're gonna let the questions for later. Once we finish the questions that we gather from the community, we're gonna go and answer the questions that we have on the chat. So let's be mindful of the time. So we can move on to the next question. And
I would just like to chime in real quick and piggyback off of what my colleague had already said. And a perfect example of that is Puerto Rico, right? You look at Puerto Ricans, they are Americans, right? They were made Americans in the 40s. They're Americans, right? They've been living in the United States for many generations. I will tell you that the vast majority of Puerto Ricans that live in New York, in Orlando, they probably don't speak Spanish very well, proficiently. But try to tell them that they're not Latino. Try to tell them they're not Puerto Rican. I know individuals in my own family, they have tattoos of Puerto Rico, of the bandera, right everywhere. You can't get in their car, in their house, and they have their flags everywhere. They're very patriotic. They're very in love with their country, and they feel very, 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 very Puerto Rican. They self-identify as Latino. They self-identify as Puerto Rican, as Caribbean. And you cannot separate the two just because they don't speak language. So Spanish speaking probably isn't going to work, especially when you have so many people that are more fluent, that are non-Latino, that are white or other, especially Chinese. Chinese speak a lot of Spanish. So Spanish speaking probably isn't the right term. I would agree and say that Latino is probably going to outlive everything else, but that's just a thought.
So Spanish speaking, Rafael Prieto, by the way, see, I know you probably can answer the question. Spanish speakers were in 1980. Is that correct?
What?
And Spanish speaker was used before Hispanic, right? Is that correct? You can probably help me with that.
What I say was that in 1968, Congressman Ed Roybal, a Mexican, was one of the persons that create the Hispanic Heritage Week. See, in 1968, more than a half century ago, and that before that, in El Diario La Prensa, that was founded in 1910 and was called in New York always as El Campeón de los Hispanos, was using the term Hispanic even in the 40s.
So Rafael, which one you think is gonna prevail and why?
I am not.
Why?
I'm not saying that any of the two terms are going to prevail. My point when I say when I mentioned the headline in EFE was precisely that for us, for the media, that we are guiding the language is very muy cómodo.
Comfortable, suitable.
Using the two terms.
Which two terms? Because we have like 3 or 4.
No, the three of them I discard completely.
You
Latinx.
do not agree.
I discard Latinx long time ago, and when I see all the polls that everybody says, less than 3% of the people use that term.
According to Pew Hispanic Center, Pew Research.
Look the research and all the polls, and Latinx is used in the academics and people that want to discuss all these things that we are discussing today.
Okay.
But in the practical world, they are using those two terms.
But things change.
And I'm going to explain.
Change. We evolve.
Yeah, people change, but it's a paradox that the Mexican was very resistant about España, were the ones that established the word for the celebration of the Hispanics in the country. It was the other thing that you have to take in consideration is that in Florida, there are a lot of Cubans, and a lot of Cubans that are 2 or 3 generations from Spain. They are granddaughters from people that came from Spain, and they prefer Hispanic, and they are in the place where the media, the Spanish language media, goes all over the country. And before the use of Hispanic and Latino, the country or the Hispanics in the country were very divided. We were three nationalities prevailed everything: Cubans, Puerto Ricans, and Mexicans. And that doesn't happen anymore.
Thank you, Rafael. We're moving to the last question, and then we give enough time to answer other questions that we have on the chat. So all Spanish nouns have lexical gender, either masculine or feminine, and most nouns referring to male humans or animals are grammatically masculine, while most referring to females are feminine. Most gender features are common to all the Romance languages. There are more than 900 million native speakers of Roman languages found worldwide, mainly in the Americas, Europe, and parts of Africa. The Romance languages, sometimes referred to as Latin languages or Neo-Latin languages, are the various modern languages that evolved from Vulgar Latin. The 6 most widely spoken Romance languages by number of native speakers are Spanish with 489 million, Portuguese 283 million, French 77 million, Italian 67 million, Romanian 24 million, and Catalan 4.5 million. Among all the Romance languages, including national and regional languages, Italian and Sardinian are the least divergent from Latin. The most divergent from Latin is French, which was heavily influenced by Germanic languages. Do you think Latinos, Hispanics, or Spanish speaking or Latinx care how they or we are categorized or identified as they did in the 80s and 90s? Why would they care? And why do they care then? And why do they care now? Why is it important? And then we have 2 more questions on the chat. How do you begin? Let's answer that. And then we go to give time, please, for the 2 questions that we have on the chat. So do you think Latinos, Hispanics, or Latinx care of how they categorize as they did in the 80s and the 90s?
And we're talking specifically here in the US, right? Here in the US, because that's where the problem is, right? It's not in the world.
It's up to you.
It's specifically in the US. I go back to what I said before. This is an identity issue. When you try to force people into a box, it doesn't work. So I say, again, if you self-identify, and that's why Latinx was created, right? There's a group of individuals that didn't feel like they were included. They weren't seen. They were other, right? And that's where it starts, right? So they wanted to create something to let folks know, okay, well, then we are this. That you guys can say what you want, but we are this. I think the power comes in inclusion, and inclusion means you include everyone, right? So when you leave any group out, that's not a good thing. That's not a good thing. So I think that the media and government and everyone else needs to just, take a little extra effort and put Hispanic, Latino, Latinx. That way you include everybody if you want to include everybody. But I still say we're not the same, right? So don't include us altogether, right? Puerto Ricans think different than Cubans. Cubans think different than South Americans. South Americans think different than other individuals, right? Colombians think completely different than Venezuelans, even though they're right next to each other. So, you want to include everyone, then we can say, okay, in this particular sentence, we're going to say Puerto Ricans or we're going to say Cubans, but we don't want to do that, right? We want to lump everybody together. So the lesser of the evils is to say Hispanic, Latino, Latinx, and leave it at that. That's the way I would see it.
Karina, I'll take a stab at answering your question just from my perspective. Again, I work at a university, and that is aligned with also the age or the average age of today's US Latino. Today's US Latino is very much a youth, ages, let's say, 19 to 25. Your average age has got to be somewhere else. So to answer your question, do I think that today's Latinos care about how they were identified in the 80s or the 90s? Well, the populations that a lot of us are going to be working with very soon were not even born in that area, and the very few that might end up working with the segregating data where the terms are codifying us and lumping us into one, they may want to know some of the history of why am I using this term versus another term. But no, I don't think that really is an issue of their concern. I think that they're going to stick to where I stand today in my introspective reality and in my own identity. And whatever that identity is, they're going to stay firm to it for the lapse of time for which they identify, because time changes, identities change, our own development, just we go through the journey. And so while they while they were tied or closer, had closer links to their original family, maybe that family identify heavily with Hispanic. And so that's what they learn. They go on to the next journey, and now they have different influences. They're learning more about other parts of their identity. And maybe now they identify as Latino. Maybe they will never identify with either one. They will always be Mexicano. They will always be Peruano, and nothing is going to shift them out of that, no matter whether they are second, third, fourth generation. So, but I don't, just from where I stand and the community that I work with, it would be very far and few those that truly care or even dig into where this term, how they were codified in the 80s and 90s.
I think the Hispanic and Latino are very current. Everybody
Are very, sorry, Rafael, I didn't hear, are very
current.
okay.
They are right now in position. We just celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month. Everybody in the country celebrated. Even this event mentioned Hispanic Heritage Month at the beginning of the presentation. That's a fact. That's a fact. That's not something, an idea. You know, the Academy of Spanish Language in the US, they already settled Hispanic and Latino. They are already, as well, the Royal Academy accept both terms to identify Hispanics in the US already. However, one of the academics invented Hispano-Unidense. And I say that seems like a product to clean something or a chemical. Why? Because we have to be proud to be 60 million. We have to be proud that right now we communicate with each other. We have to be proud to listen with Pablo Neruda that says that they took everything, but they left the language that right now even unified us in by the Los Angeles Times style book or the New York Times that are American, very American media outlets. So let's decide to call ours as we have been called for a long time. The national identity will never leave. Everyone will be, if they came from a clear background, or a Peruvian, or a Colombian, or a Puerto Rican, or a Venezuelan. But when we need money for roads, for schools, for power, we need to be a Latino or an Hispano.
Thank you, Rafael. We have two questions and we're running out of time almost. We have two questions on the chat. One is from Tammy Reed. How do you begin the awareness of those that are privileged and or empowered, encourage the self-reflection and help them grow towards inclusion? And the other question is, how would you say the recognition of gender roles has influenced the evolution of language regarding the terms Latino, Hispanics, and Latinx?
I'll take a stab at the first one. I think that everything changes, todo cambia, right? And so as things evolve and as things change, I know that what Rafael was saying about Pablo Neruda, where he says they took everything, but they left our language. But yeah, say that to a Puerto Rican when the Spaniards came and the first thing that they took away was the language. All right, The first thing that they did to the Puerto Ricans and the Tainos and those in the Caribbean was, and even Colombia, was take away the language. So, I mean, come on. We evolve, things change, right? And in the United States, the place that we've decided to live, which is what we're talking about here, because this problem doesn't exist in Puerto Rico. There's no Latinx, Hispano things in Puerto Rico. It's, you're Puerto Rican, period. You're Boricua, you're Puerto Rican. Colombia, I bet you it's the same thing. Venezuela is the same thing. Mexico, they're Mexicans, they're nothing else, right? And so this is a United States problem, or this is not a problem, but an issue here. And we're talking about Latinx was formed because people didn't feel included. People felt other. They didn't feel like they could identify themselves in any of the things that was going on, in the politics, in the laws, in everything that was surrounding them. So they created this term to let folks know who they were. My only issue with this Latinx thing is when the media and with government decides, okay, well, that's the new term, so everybody else from now on is the Latinx thing. Well, wait a minute here, don't dismiss me, right? I've been dealing, I've always identified as Latino, now you're dismissing me. So if we're doing something because of inclusion, I say Hispano, Latino, Latinx, everybody's included, and it's not that many more words. Latinx is not that many more words, letters in order to add, and then that way everybody's happy.
Before the other panelists say the answer, I want to honor Lenin Caro. He actually have a question very tied to these comments that you're making, Rafael. Lenin says, I want to ask about another dimension to the representation issue. In the US Census and often in other surveys, Latino, Latina, Latinx, or Hispanic is an ethnicity, not a race. And yet many Latinos that I encounter conceptualize the racial category that they identify with. What are the panelists' thoughts on this? I think that's important, very important issue too.
The census is very clear in the explanation and says Latino or Hispanic is not a race. That is the first thing that the census.
He's saying that people are the ones
that's the wrong identification that the people made and says, okay, because the census is very clear. It says you can be white, you can be Black, you can be Asian, you can be, and of course it's a mixture. I'm a mixture. I did my my DNA, and I am 37% Indian from Colombia, Venezuela, and Ecuador. 1% from Mexico. I am 28% proud to be from Spain, and 22% from Portugal, and 3% from Africa. I'm a combination, like most of us, and I would like for us to do a reflection. If we start to say, okay, coming from Spain is terrible, or being an Indian is terrible, or being an African is terrible. We have to be proud of what we are, of what we are. We are a result of love from people from different backgrounds.
Karina, I'll expand on the question. Yes, I see, and I'm glad that the question was posed, or the comment was made, that truly our community is an ethnic community. It is not a race. And I hear you saying that the community itself is identified possibly as a race, and that simply is just speaks for the lack of education that our community still needs to go through, and just learning the difference between ethnic groups and racial groups, if you believe that they're racial groups. But I believe that that is perpetuated very much because the Latino community tends to fall into a certain stereotype. I think that we have it right here. We all are, our phenotypes alone speak for that blend that Rafael is very much speaking of, but very seldom do we have Black Latinos on the screens, or we seldom have Asian Latinos on the screen, or your 90% plus a Caucasian Latino on the screen. So I think that the fact that we are here exemplifying the stereotype of the Latino phenotype is part of why so much of our community still hasn't learned about the difference between the racial background and ethnic background. And very much like Rafael, I also did my DNA, and I wanted to just clarify, and I don't know which Rafael made the note that here we are all of us white Latinos. I don't identify myself as a white Latina. Actually, my DNA proves it wrong, proves also that I am over 50% indigenous, very much an Andean community. And so that is an additional layer of identity, and that is very much so.
Something that I want to invite Edelmira is to look in the mixture, the percentage of mixture of the countries that Spain conquered, and what is the percentage of mestizos, mulattos, even and in the Caribbean, the mulattos and compare that with the countries that were conquered by British. Compare how much population is mixture in Canada, in New Zealand, in Australia, even in the US. Compare with Colombia, where 60% is mestizo, 18% is mulatto, and whites, pure whites are 1%, and Indians, unfortunately, they are like 5% or something like that. And go to any of the countries, go to Dominican Republic, go to Peru, go to Ecuador, go to Venezuela, go to this Central America, and see the percentage of the combination of the people.
Well,
compare with the English countries, that the percentage is 12%. 12%. The people are mixed.
Thank you for all your knowledge shared today, and thank you all of you for participants and panelists as well for the insight and expertise you share. We are grateful for your time today and for the very important work that you do every day. Look for a follow-up email from Community Engagement. We will share additional resources and a link to the recording of this webinar and a brief survey for your feedback. Thank you to our viewers for watching today. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Until then, may you remain peaceful and well. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you. Gracias.
Thank you.
Bye.